Picture yourself on a Friday evening in 1965, standing at the factory gates or the office door, holding a small brown envelope in your hand. The weight of it, not much, just a bit of paper and folded notes. But the feeling of it was everything. Payday, a week's wages. You'd tear open the envelope right there on the street, count the notes quickly, feel the coins at the bottom. £15, maybe 16 if you'd done overtime. In your hand, a week of your life converted into crisp pound notes and heavy silver coins. And that money, that modest sum that wouldn't buy you a decent meal out today, that was power. That was a roof over your head, food on the table, a night at the pictures, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit left over for something special. This is the story of what a week's wages actually bought in 1960s Britain. Not what the economists say it was worth, not what the inflation calculators tell you, but what it really meant, how it felt to walk down the high street with 15 quid in your pocket and know exactly what your life could afford. Friday night, 1965. The average working man brought home about $15 a week. That's not a fortune by any stretch, but let's be clear about what that meant. A woman doing the same work might take home $8 or $9, utterly unfair, but that was the reality. A skilled tradesman, a toolmaker or a fitter, might get $18 or $20, an office clerk perhaps $12. But for most working families, you were looking at somewhere between 12 and 18s a week as your household income. Every penny of it counted. Every penny of it had a job to do. The very first thing that money had to cover was the roof over your head. Rent, if you were in a council flat or private landlord's property, might run you 2 to 3 a week. That's right, 2 quid. For an entire week of housing, a decent 2-bedroom council flat in London could be had for 2.10s a week. Further north, in the Midlands or Lancashire, you might pay 1.15s, maybe $2 at most. Of course, if you were buying your own place, the mortgage was a different matter, perhaps 5 to 7s a week for a semi-detached in the suburbs. But most folk rented. £2 a week for a roof, heating included if you were in a council place with communal boilers. Coal for the fire if you weren't. That'd be another few bob a week in winter, but we'll get to that. So you've paid your rent. You've got 13 plus left from your 15 wage packet. Now comes the food. Saturday morning, you'd head down to the high street with your wife, maybe the kids trailing along, and you'd do the week's shop. Not at a supermarket. Those were just starting to appear. Strange new places where you picked things off shelves yourself instead of asking the grocer, but at the proper shops. The butchers, the greengrocers, the bakers, the grocers, for your tinned goods and dry stores. You knew every shopkeeper by name. They knew you, knew your usual order, knew how much you could afford. At the butcher's, you might spend £1.10 for the week. That'd get you a joint of beef for Sunday, maybe £3 of silverside, enough to feed a family of 4 with leftovers for Monday's cold cuts. Sausages for Tuesday, half a dozen for £2.60. A bit of liver for Wednesday, cheap as chips at £1.60. Maybe some mince for Thursday's cottage pie, 3s a pound. A chicken if you were feeling flush. A whole bird for 6s, a real treat. You made that meat stretch. Every bit of it had a purpose, and nothing, absolutely nothing, went to waste. The greengrocers took another 15s or so. Potatoes were the foundation. A stone of spuds, that's £14, cost you maybe £1.60 and lasted the whole week. Carrots, onions, cabbage, turnips, a few pence each. Fresh vegetables weren't exotic luxuries. They were just what you ate. Apples in winter, strawberries in summer if you were lucky, but mostly you ate what was in season because that's what was cheap. A pound of apples cost you £1, a cabbage 60. Simple food, basic food, but it was fresh and it was real. The bakers saw another 10s of your money. A large white loaf was 8d. You'd buy 7 or 8 for the week. 1 a day wasn't uncommon in a working household. Fresh bread every morning. Still warm if you got there early enough. The smell of it, that's something you don't forget. And if there was a bit extra, you might get a few currant buns for Sunday tea, or a jam tart for the kids. Small pleasures that cost pennies. Please subscribe to the channel to keep these stories of everyday Britain alive. These memories matter. At the grocer's, you'd stock up on the essentials. Tea, absolutely essential, the backbone of British life, cost about £3.60 for half a pound of decent stuff. That'd last you the week if you were careful. though some families went through more. Sugar, one's a pound. A tin of condensed milk, one's threed. Butter, 2/6 for a pound. Margarine, if butter was too dear, 1/6 for the same amount. A jar of jam, one's 9. Biscuits, a packet of digestives or rich tea, 1/60. Tins of beans, maybe 3 or 4 at one's each. Corned beef, 2s 3d a tin, a standby for quick suppers. A packet of Bird's custard powder, one's essential for desserts. A bottle of camp coffee, 2b6d, though instant Nescafe was becoming popular at 3s a jar. All told, you might spend $4 to $5 on food for the week. That's roughly a third of your wages gone, on keeping your family fed. It wasn't fancy. You weren't eating out, you weren't buying expensive cuts of meat, you weren't having exotic fruit or fancy foreign foods. But you ate, and you ate properly. 3 meals a day, cooked at home, sitting round the table together. So now you're down to 8 or 9 from your original 15,000. What else needed paying? Gas and electric, maybe 10s to 15s a week, depending on the season. Winter cost more with the lights on longer and the immersion heater running for hot water. You fed the meter with shillings, heard them clank down, watched the dial spin. You knew exactly how much you were using because you could see it disappearing, coin by coin. Coal in winter added another expense. If you had a coal fire, and most people did, you'd need 100 weight, that's 112 pounds, delivered every week or two. That cost you 15s to 1 to Hollands depending where you lived. The coalman would deliver it in heavy sacks, tip it into the coal bunker by your back door. You'd shovel it into the scuttle, carry it through to the living room, keep the fire burning from tea time till bedtime, the only source of heat in most houses, the centre of family life. You'd need a few bob for the laundry, 5s or so if you used the laundrette, though most women still washed at home with a twin tub, or in some houses an old copper boiler and a mangle. Soap powder, a big box of Persil or Omo, cost you $2.60 and lasted a couple of weeks. Transport to work took another chunk. If you took the bus, you might spend 5s a week on fares. The tube in London was more, perhaps 7s or 8s for the week. Or you cycled, like thousands did, and saved the lot. A new bicycle cost about $15, a whole week's wages, but it lasted for years and paid for itself in saved bus fares within months. That left you with maybe $3 or $4 from your original 15 wage packet. And this is where life got interesting, because this was the money that made life worth living. A pint of beer at the local cost you $1.60, maybe $1.09 in London. A packet of 20 cigarettes, Players Woodbine Senior Service, ran you about $3.60. If you went to the pub on Friday and Saturday night, had 3 or 4 pints each evening, maybe a packet of fags, you'd spend 15s to $1. That was your social life, your community, your way of unwinding after a week's hard graft. The working men's club was cheaper, beer at 1's 3d a pint, and you'd see your mates, play darts, maybe have a sing-song. The pictures cost you $3.60 for a seat in the stalls, $4.60 for the circle if you wanted to push the boat out. You'd see a double bill, 2 films, a newsreel, maybe a cartoon, and make an evening of it. Saturday night at the cinema with your wife cost you 10s, including a couple of ice creams in the interval. Once a week if you could manage it, once a fortnight if money was tight. A night at the dance hall, $2.60 entry, maybe another 2s for a couple of soft drinks. Live music, a proper band, the chance to actually dance instead of just watching. Young couples saved up for Saturday night at the Palais or the Locarno, got dressed up in their best, spent 5s between them and thought it worth every penny. Football on Saturday afternoon cost you 3s for a standing ticket on the terraces, maybe 6 for a seat in the stand. You'd go with your dad or your mates, watch your local team, come home hoarse from shouting. That 3s bought you 90 minutes of passion, of belonging, of being part of something bigger than yourself. If you had kids, you'd give them pocket money, 6pence each maybe, or a shilling if you were feeling generous or they'd been particularly good. They'd take that shilling down to the sweet shop and come back with a quarter of pear drops, a sherbet dip, a couple of licorice sticks, and still have change. Or they'd save it for the Saturday morning pictures, 9 for the children's cinema club, where they'd watch Flash Gordon or a western, sing along with the organist, go absolutely wild. New clothes didn't come often, but when they did, you felt it. A man's suit from Burton's might cost $12 to $15, A full week's wages or more for something decent that you'd wear to work, to church, to weddings and funerals for the next 10 years. You looked after it. Had it cleaned, pressed, mended when it needed it. A woman's winter coat, $8 to $10. A pair of men's shoes, $3.10. Kids' shoes, 25s or so. And they'd better last because the next pair wouldn't come until these ones were worn through. But here's the thing about clothes. You didn't need many. You had your work clothes, your Sunday best, maybe one change of each. You washed them, mended them, made them last. The idea of having a wardrobe full of clothes you barely wore would have seemed mad. You wore what you had until it wore out. Then you replaced it. Simple as that. Entertainment at home was simpler, cheaper. The wireless was free once you'd paid your 10-bob TV license, though plenty of households still didn't have a telly in the early 60s. You listened to the light programme, the home service, Radio Luxembourg at night under the covers. A newspaper cost you 3D, maybe 4D for the Sunday paper with all its supplements. A paperback book from the newsagents was $3.60. A woman's magazine like Woman's Own or Woman's Weekly $60. The Radio Times 4D so you knew what was on. A telephone was still a luxury. If you had one, and many households didn't, the rental was about 10s a quarter, and calls cost 3D for 3 minutes local. Most people used the phone box on the corner, fed it with pennies and twopences, had quick conversations standing in the red kiosk while the pips counted down your money. If you remember that week's shop in the mid-60s, share your story in the comments. What did your dad earn? What did your mum buy with it? How far did it stretch? Now, let's talk about the bigger things, the things you saved for. A week's holiday at the seaside, Blackpool, Margate, Skegness, might cost a family of four $30 to $40 all in. That's 2 or 3 weeks' wages. You'd book it through your work's holiday club, pay a bit each week all year, and when summer came round, you'd have it covered. A week in a boarding house with full board, 3 meals a day, use of the lounge, deck chairs on the beach, that was living. The landlady served you breakfast, dinner and tea, and you spent your days on the beach in the arcades at the pier. Evening entertainment, a couple of pints, some sticks of rock to bring home. You might spend another 10 over the week. But you'd been saving for it, and it was worth it. A new pram for the baby, a proper silver cross that'd last through 3 children, cost $15 to $20. A week's wages or more, but it was an investment. Your sister would borrow it, your neighbour would use it, and eventually you'd sell it second-hand for half what you paid and it'd still be in perfect condition. A new 3-piece suite for the front room, settee and 2 armchairs, might set you back $50 to $60. You'd save for a year, or you'd use a hire purchase scheme, pay 10s a week for 2 years. Same with a new telly, $60 to $80 for a decent set in the mid-60s. But again, you'd put it on the HP, pay it off bit by bit, £1 a week, every week, for over a year. But you'd have it, and that mattered. A car was the real dream. A brand new Ford Anglia cost about $500 in 1965. That's more than 6 months' wages for an average worker. But a second-hand motor, 5 or 6 years old, a bit battered but still going, could be had for $100 to $150. You'd save for it, borrow from the family, scrape together a deposit and pay the rest off over a year. Petrol was 5s a gallon. Expensive, yes, but manageable if you only used the car for weekend trips and holidays. Insurance, road tax, maintenance, it added up. But having your own wheels, the freedom to go where you wanted, when you wanted, that was priceless. Or you saved for a house. If you were buying rather than renting, a terraced house in the north might cost $1,500 to $2,000. A semi-detached in the suburbs, $3,000 to $4,000. In London, more like $5,000 to $6,000. These weren't small sums, they represented years of saving, decades of mortgage payments, but they were achievable. A working man on $15 a week could realistically aspire to own his own home. You'd save a deposit, $200, $300 if you could manage it, and the building society would lend you the rest. Your mortgage might be $6 a week, steep but manageable if both husband and wife were working. But here's the truth of it. For most families in the 1960s, on $15 a week, there wasn't much left over. You paid your rent, bought your food, covered your bills, had a bit for the weekend, and that was it. Savings? Maybe a couple of quid a week if you were careful, if nothing went wrong, if the kids didn't need new shoes or the winter wasn't too harsh. Most families lived right up to their means, week to week, managing carefully, making do. And yet, and this is the strange thing, it didn't feel like poverty. It felt normal. Everyone you knew lived the same way. Your neighbours, your workmates, your family, they all had roughly the same amount, spent it on roughly the same things, had roughly the same concerns. There wasn't the vast gulf between rich and poor that there is now. There were posh people, sure, but you didn't see them, didn't compare yourself to them. You compared yourself to the family next door, and they were managing on about the same as you. What does a week's wages buy you now? The average weekly wage in Britain today is around $640. Sounds like a fortune compared to $15, doesn't it? But think about what it buys. Your rent or mortgage might take $200 or $300 of that. Your food shopping, if you're feeding a family, could easily be $100 to $150. Your bills, energy, water, council tax, phone, internet, another $100 or more. Transport, whether it's a car or public transport, another chunk. Before you know it, that $640 is gone, and you're wondering where it all went. The difference is this. In the 1960s, on $15 a week, you knew exactly where every penny went because you had to. You budgeted, you planned, you made decisions. You couldn't just buy whatever you wanted because you didn't have whatever you wanted. You had enough, and enough was enough. There was a simplicity to it, a clarity. Money came in on Friday, it went out during the week, and by the following Thursday you were waiting for Friday to come round again. Was it better? That's not for me to say. It was different. The money went further in some ways. Housing was cheaper relative to wages. Food was a smaller proportion of your income if you cooked everything yourself. But you had less choice, less convenience, less of everything really. No foreign holidays, no eating out every week, no new clothes just because you fancied them. You had what you needed and a little bit extra for pleasure, and that was your life. But here's what that £15 bought that money can't buy now. It bought certainty. You knew what things cost. You knew what you could afford. You knew that if you saved £1 a week, in 6 months you'd have $26, and you could buy that thing you'd been wanting. Everything had a price, and that price was fixed, and you could plan around it. There was a stability to it that's hard to explain to someone who didn't live through it, and it brought community. Because when everyone's in the same boat, when everyone's managing on about the same amount, you help each other. You share. Your neighbour lends you a cup of sugar, you give her some eggs from your allotment. Someone's a bit short before payday, you slip them a 10-bob note, they'll pay you back next week. You look after each other because that's what people did. Money was tight, but hands were open. 60 years on, Britain's a wealthier country. We earn more, we have more, we can do more. But something's been lost in the translation. That sense of everything having a proper value, a proper price. That sense of knowing what you could afford and living within it. That sense of community that came from everyone struggling a bit, managing a bit, getting by together. If you earned $50 a week in 1960s Britain, or your dad did, or you remember what things cost, drop a comment. What do you remember buying? What treats did you save for? How far did a week's wages stretch in your house? I'd love to hear each and every one of your stories. Share this video, subscribe to keep these moments of British life alive, and remember when $15 wasn't just money, it was a week of your life, carefully spent, gratefully received, and somehow, miraculously, just about enough. Until next time, hold those memories close.